get hit. So I'm gonna say LeBron James. And you know what? Let the debate begin. And I don't give a rat's ass if they do. I just telling you who I would like. That's all.
I said that LeBron will. I find him to be the most talented player I've ever seen in NBA history. Got a problem with that statement by me?
Well, you sound like you're threatening me.
No, I'm not threatening you. I'm.
Karl Malone just said out loud what a lot of people have quietly believed for years, and because of who he is, the comment hit the basketball world with far more force than the usual social media shouting ever could. This was not some anonymous troll tossing out cheap bait or some click-hungry commentator trying to farm outrage. This was a two-time MVP, a Hall of Famer, one of the greatest power forwards the NBA has ever seen, and when a player of that stature speaks on greatness, people listen differently. That is why his remarks about LeBron James landed so hard. For more than a decade, the public has been fed the same non-stop message that LeBron is the unquestioned greatest player of all time, that the discussion is basically closed, and that anyone who disagrees must be biased, uninformed, or blinded by nostalgia. That narrative has been repeated so often across sports television, social media, and modern basketball discourse that it almost feels protected from criticism, and LeBron himself has never exactly run from that image, embracing the king identity, leaning into the mythology around his career, and controlling his public narrative more aggressively than almost any superstar in modern sports. But once you place yourself on that kind of untouchable pedestal, eventually somebody with real authority is going to challenge it, and when Karl Malone did exactly that, it cut through the noise because he did not speak like a provocateur. He spoke like a former all-time great, looking at the resume, looking at the history, and refusing to pretend that the GOAT debate should be settled in LeBron's favor. According to this framing, what made Malone's comments so explosive was not just that he questioned LeBron, but that he did so calmly, directly, and with the kind of blunt logic that LeBron supporters hate having dragged back into the center of the conversation. The biggest point, of course, was the finals record. Malone pushed hard on the idea that if someone is going to be called the greatest ever, then the biggest stage has to reflect that in a nearly undeniable way, and in his view, a 4-6 finals record simply does not scream greatest of all time. In that argument, making the finals 10 times is not the same as dominating them, and losses on the biggest stage do not become badges of honor just because they came under brighter lights. That is where the comparison to Michael Jordan becomes unavoidable, because Jordan's resume in the finals remains the cleanest and most devastating standard in the debate. 6 trips, 6 championships, 6 finals MVPs, no Game 7 in the finals, no visible cracks in the moment where legends are judged most harshly. Malone's point, as framed here, is that this is what ultimate greatness is supposed to look like, and that LeBron's record in that same arena simply does not match the standard. From there, the critique goes deeper, moving beyond rings into the way LeBron built his championships. Malone's attack reportedly leaned into one of the most persistent criticisms of LeBron's career, which is that he has repeatedly changed teams, reshaped rosters, and aligned himself with elite talent rather than staying put and building a dynasty the way old-school fans romanticize. The argument is that he left Cleveland when he could not get it done there, joined forces with star teammates in Miami, later returned to a more favorable situation in Cleveland with another star-heavy setup, and then went west to Los Angeles where he again paired up with elite-level help. In that telling, LeBron did not simply elevate what he had around him. He repeatedly went searching for better circumstances, and for critics, that matters when measuring him against legends whose stories are remembered as more internally built than externally assembled. Malone's side of the argument treats that as a major distinction between being one of the greatest players ever and being the greatest, because in that worldview, the true GOAT is supposed to raise the level of his environment rather than continually reconstruct it. The criticism also leans heavily on the eye test and on the emotional memory of high-pressure moments. This is where people bring up the idea that when the game was on the line, Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant wanted the ball with the full weight of success or failure on their shoulders, while LeBron, fairly or unfairly, has often carried a reputation for deferring in those moments, kicking to a teammate, making the right basketball play, and opening himself to accusations that he was avoiding blame rather than embracing the burden. That reputation may be simplistic, but it remains one of the most powerful emotional narratives in the GOAT debate, and Malone's criticism taps directly into it. It also inevitably circles back to the 2011 finals against Dallas, the stain that LeBron's harshest critics still treat as the most devastating anti-GOAT evidence on his resume. That series is remembered as the moment when Miami had too much talent to lose, yet LeBron failed to dominate, disappeared in crucial stretches, and delivered a performance that does not fit comfortably beside the mythic standards attached to the greatest player ever label. In this version of the argument, that collapse is not a minor blemish. It is proof that at the highest pressure point, LeBron showed something the true GOAT never should. Another layer that gives the whole thing extra fuel is the reaction around it. LeBron's defenders are described as going into instant meltdown mode, throwing the usual counters about longevity, total points, all-around production, finals appearances, weak teammates, and the strength of opponents, especially compared with Jordan's path. But Malone supporters would say those counters keep dodging the core issue rather than answering it. They would argue that longevity is impressive but not decisive, that accumulating numbers over 2 decades is not the same thing as having the highest peak of killer greatness, and that showing up in the finals more often does not automatically outweigh losing there more often. They would also push back on one of the most common defenses of LeBron's finals losses, which is that some of those defeats came against impossible opponents like the Warriors dynasty, by saying that while context matters, the GOAT debate is supposed to be ruthless precisely because it is about the very top spot. In that environment, excuses, explanations, and context can soften criticism, but they do not erase outcomes. What makes the whole episode feel even more dramatic in this telling is the silence that followed. LeBron, one of the most visible and vocal athletes in the world, reportedly said nothing after Malone's remarks, and that silence became part of the story all by itself. Critics took it as a sign that the comments hit a nerve, that this was not the kind of criticism that could be easily laughed off or brushed aside, and that even the media ecosystem often friendly to LeBron seemed oddly uninterested in amplifying the moment. That media hesitation becomes part of the larger claim being made here, which is that mainstream basketball culture has spent years building and defending the LeBron as GOAT narrative and now feels uncomfortable when someone with undeniable basketball authority punches holes in it from the inside. The reaction also reveals a generational divide that has shaped this debate for years. The 2011 finals collapse against Dallas, a team that had no business beating that Miami roster, along with the repeated moments where LeBron deferred instead of taking over, instead of closing the door the way Michael Jordan always did, illustrates the difference between being great and being the greatest. LeBron James is undoubtedly one of the best players ever, but the greatest? Not even close, and people need to stop pretending otherwise just because the media pushes that narrative. The silence following that observation was heavy, palpable through the screen as the host rushed to change the topic, but it didn't matter. The damage was done, and Karl Malone had delivered a statement that quickly went viral across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. LeBron fans were furious, firing off insults, but a notable portion of the audience nodded along because finally, someone with real credibility had articulated what many had been thinking for years. Malone didn't just throw out hot takes. He backed every point with facts LeBron's defenders had avoided, revisiting the 4-6 finals record that fans often excuse by citing multiple appearances, and dismantling it with clarity. Participation alone does not equal greatness. Champions remember wins, not second-place finishes. Michael Jordan never lost in the finals, setting the benchmark for ultimate excellence. Malone went further, applying the eye test to define real greatness under pressure. When the game was on the line, players like Jordan and Kobe wanted the moment and delivered, whereas LeBron has often deferred to role players late in games, including the infamous 2011 finals where he averaged just 17.8 points and disappeared in crucial fourth quarters. Beyond performance, Malone critiqued LeBron's team hopping, highlighting how he moved from franchise to franchise, handpicking teammates and orchestrating super teams, in contrast to Jordan, who built greatness around his existing roster and elevated the players around him. Malone laid out the cold, uncomfortable facts with no filter, sending social media into meltdown as LeBron supporters scrambled to defend him with weak retorts about longevity and totals, while trying to discredit Malone for not winning a ring, an argument that collapses under scrutiny because Malone never claimed to be the GOAT. He was simply evaluating LeBron against the established standards of ultimate greatness. The post-interview silence from LeBron was striking, with no response or statement from his camp and minimal coverage from media allies, suggesting those around him hoped it would fade. But basketball fans don't forget, and the longer he remained quiet, the louder the question grew. Did Malone hit a nerve that could not be argued away? Other legends quietly weighed in, liking tweets and making subtle comments about championship DNA without naming names, signaling the divide. This incident also exposed a generational gap. Older fans who remember Jordan's dominance sided with Malone, valuing the unflinching standard of excellence, while younger fans who grew up watching LeBron work to defend him, citing longevity, stats, and a weaker Eastern Conference. None of those points addressed Malone's central argument. LeBron's resume doesn't justify the GOAT label. The media's predictable discomfort was evident, with major networks largely ignoring it and a few commentators attempting to dismiss it as an elder complaining, while Malone effectively punched holes in a narrative constructed over decades. This was not a random podcaster chasing clicks. This was Karl Malone, one of the 75 greatest NBA players ever, saying aloud what the basketball world had tiptoed around for years, and the most uncomfortable truth is that, in this context, he is right.